The Tharian royal cruiser drifted helplessly near the edge of the Veil Nebula, its engines silent, its hull torn open by a sudden and violent gravitational storm, and inside its broken frame sat Queen Seraya, alone, bruised, and fading fast. Her golden skin dim under the flickering lights, her guards lost, her council dead, and no signal making it past the crushing pull of the nearby dying stars. Every breath she took felt heavier, and with each minute she knew the end was close until a strange sound, a faint metallic hum, cut through the silence, and a small, old Earth-made scout ship burst through the violet clouds like a ghost from forgotten history, its shape clunky but solid, its path steady as it locked onto the cruiser and docked without permission. Seraya blinked in disbelief when the hatch opened, and a human stepped out, a man in a worn jacket, eyes sharp, face tired, and voice calm, calling her by name though she had never seen him before, and without asking for rank or reason, he helped her up, checked her wounds, and carried her to his ship, where everything smelled of rust, fuel, and something strangely comforting, like earth pinewood. She tried to speak, to demand answers, but the pain won, and she slipped into a shallow sleep, waking hours later in a warm bunk with lights dimmed low, and a cup of something sweet beside her, and the man who still hadn't shared his name was fixing a damaged panel and humming a song she didn't recognize. When she asked who he was, he only said, "Just someone passing through," and turned back to his work, but he never left her side for long, tending to her wounds with old medkits, and telling quiet stories about Earth cities with open skies, oceans that breathed, and people who felt lost even among their own kind. She listened in silence, feeling a strange peace settle into her chest, and by the second night, when her strength returned, they sat side by side in the ship's cramped observation deck, watching blue stars swirl across the nebula, and she told him how the crown had trapped her, how every decision came with weight and war, and how she had once wished to vanish and never be found again. He didn't laugh, didn't question her royalty, just nodded like he understood, and for a brief, quiet moment they were no longer queen and stranger, but simply two souls beneath dying stars, sharing silence that felt louder than any war drums. When she offered him her royal crystal, a stone that pulsed with soft light and marked the heart of her people, he hesitated, then took it with both hands, as if it meant more than just a gift. She leaned on him that night, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, and for the first time in many long cycles she slept without fear. But when morning came and light filtered through the ship's rusted windows, he was gone, the pilot's seat empty, his gear vanished, and her crystal, the one she had given him, was missing too. Only the hum of the engines remained, now stabilized and programmed to return her to Tharian space. And as she sat alone in the co-pilot's seat, unsure whether to feel grateful or abandoned, one thing became clear. The man had saved her life shared, a moment that shifted her heart and vanished without even telling her his name, leaving only questions, silence, and a memory that refused to fade. 5 years had passed since Queen Seraya returned to her people, changed not by war or duty, but by a single night spent with a man who had no name, no title, and no reason to save her except kindness. And though she had rebuilt her empire, brokered peace between the Tharian and several human colonies, and earned respect from friend and rival alike, She could not forget the face of the human who had vanished without a trace, taking with him not only the royal crystal she had given him, but something deeper, something no throne could replace. She had searched in secret, asking quiet questions, scanning old ship logs, trading with black market smugglers for whispers about a human pilot who had once flown through a dying nebula. But nothing ever came back, not a name, not a signal, not even a rumor that matched her memory, and her advisors began to suspect she was chasing a dream or a trick her mind had made to survive that terrible day. Still, Siralia held on to hope, carrying a hidden audio recording of their final conversation, one she replayed in the quiet hours when the palace grew too cold. And though she ruled wisely, with grace and strength, her heart waited for something the stars refused to give. Then, one quiet cycle, during a diplomatic visit to a small trade moon along the edge of human Therian territory, she walked alone through the outer markets, her royal guard keeping a respectful distance, and in the corner of a dusty mechanic's shop, she saw it a glowing crystal, worn as a pendant on a chain, swinging gently against the chest of a human man bent over a console. Her breath stopped, her heart leapt, and as the man straightened, wiping grease from his hands and turning toward her, their eyes met and she knew. It was him, older, a little thinner, beard now grown, but those eyes steady, tired, and full of quiet fire were the same. Before she could call out, he froze, then turned and walked away fast, slipping through the maze of stalls like smoke, and without hesitation, Siralia gave chase, ignoring protocol, ignoring shouts from her guards, moving faster than anyone thought a queen would, because she had waited 5 years for this moment, and she would not let it go again. Through alleys of humming tech and blinking signs, she followed him until finally, beyond the edge of the trade zone, she found him alone, standing by an old transport hub near a broken dome wall, waiting as if he knew she would catch up. And when she reached him, neither spoke for a long time, the silence thick with all the things they hadn't said. Then he smiled, just a little, and said, "I was hoping you wouldn't recognize me." And she asked, "Why did you run?" To which he answered, "Because I knew if I saw you again, I wouldn't be able to walk away." And for a moment, her heart didn't know whether to be angry or relieved, but she asked his name, his real one, and he told her Callan Reed, once a pilot, once a dreamer, now just someone who lived quietly fixing things that no one else cared about. He explained that after saving her, powerful Therian factions had marked him as a threat, not a hero, and human mercenary groups feared he had secrets that might bring unity, which they didn't want. So he disappeared, hid, not to protect himself, but to protect her legacy, because peace couldn't begin if her story was tied to a single outsider who broke every rule to help her. Siralia listened, unsure whether to feel proud or broken, because all these years she had imagined he didn't care, but the truth was harder. It was because he cared too much. He pulled a tiny device from his pocket then, the one that had recorded her voice that night in the nebula, and he admitted he had listened to it every night before sleep, not for comfort, but as a promise never to forget who he had once been when she looked at him like he mattered. Siralia reached for the pendant on his chest, touching the crystal she had once given him, and said softly, "You were never just someone passing through," and for the first time in years Callan looked like he believed her. But their quiet reunion did not last long, because just beyond the dome, hidden watchers stirred figures in dark armor, marked with old war crests. Mercenaries hired by someone who had tracked the Queen's secret search, and now saw an opportunity to destroy both the peace and the legend. Sensors triggered, alarms blinked, and Cowan's eyes widened as he saw movement in the shadows, grabbing Soralia's hand and pulling her into a side tunnel, just as a plasma bolt shattered the air behind them. And as they ran through the forgotten corridors of the trade moon, chased by enemies neither had expected, Soralia realized the danger was real, but so was the chance to finish what had begun 5 years ago. And this time she would not let him vanish into the stars again. They ran until their lungs burned, deeper into the old tunnels beneath the trade moon, where the lights flickered and the air smelled of metal, oil, and old secrets. And Callan didn't slow until he was sure the mercenaries had lost their trail, guiding Soralia into a narrow service room sealed with a rusted hatch. And once inside, they collapsed against the wall, breathless, their hearts racing not just from fear, but from everything left unsaid. In the quiet, Soralia looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just the man who had saved her life once, but the man who had carried the weight of disappearing, so she could become more than just a survivor. He had given her 5 years of peace by giving up everything he had, and now, face to face again, she wanted to understand why he had chosen silence over everything else. Callan finally spoke, his voice low and rough, telling her about the months after the rescue, how the Therian Council had tried to erase what happened, calling him a fabrication, a myth, even as bounty hunters tried to find him, and human warlords offered him money to turn over her secrets, but he had refused them all, choosing instead to live without a home, drifting from moon to moon, fixing broken systems and hiding behind a different name on every outpost, always watching, always listening, but never staying, never trusting anyone again. He called himself the man with no planet, not as a joke but as a truth, because Earth was long gone to him, and no other place had ever welcomed him back since he stepped into that nebulous storm. Soralia listened in silence, holding back tears. She didn't understand, because she had never imagined how alone he had been, how much he had sacrificed, and how the galaxy had punished him for doing something right. When he pulled out the audio chip again, the one with their old conversation, she took it gently and pressed it to her chest, whispering that it had meant just as much to her all these years, even if her life had looked full on the outside. She told him how she had built alliances, signed treaties, and calmed rebellions, but how every night before sleep she remembered that small, rusty ship and the man who looked at her like she was more than a title. Callan smiled, a slow and careful thing, like it had been buried for too long, and for a brief second there was peace between them, until a sharp beeping noise broke the moment, the sound of a tracking device hidden in the hatch above them. Someone had found their location again, and Callan's face turned grim as he grabbed her hand and said they had to move now. Instead of heading up toward the surface, he led her downward into a forgotten part of the moon, a collapsed mining shaft that once reached the lower fusion wells, and there, among debris and shadows, sat an old shuttle half buried in rock, its frame cracked, but its core still humming. Callan explained that he had found it years ago, restored it in secret, and kept it hidden for emergencies. He never thought this day would come, but now that it had, he would use it to get her out safely. Soralia stopped him, her voice sharp. and asked if he planned to vanish again once she was gone, and for a moment he said nothing. But then, slowly, he looked her in the eyes and said no, not this time, because he was tired of running, tired of hiding, and maybe it was time to stop being a ghost in someone else's story. She helped him power the shuttle, their fingers moving together across controls she hadn't touched in years, and the moment the ship groaned to life, they launched upward through the mining shaft, dodging falling metal and collapsing walls as mercenary signals closed in from all sides. In the chaos of rising smoke and alarms, Callan weaved the ship through broken passages until they burst into open space, chased by 3 attack crafts that fired warning shots across their hull. But he didn't flinch. He moved like he had. Back in the nebula, calm, quick, fearless, guiding them through a series of tight turns before activating a hidden jump beacon he had stashed long ago. The stars bent, time twisted, and the ship vanished into light just before the enemies reached them. And when they emerged on the other side, in a quiet stretch of space, near an uncharted moon, everything fell silent again, the danger behind them, at least for now. Inside the ship, Callan turned to her and said, "This place, it's where I've always come to remember." And when she asked what he remembered, he simply said, "You," and something inside her broke and healed at the same time. They landed on the moon, where old ruins from a forgotten colony still stood, and there, beneath a violet sky, they sat on the edge of an empty watchtower and watched the stars in silence. For the first time, Seraya took his hand, not as a queen, but as someone who had waited too long to speak her truth, and she asked him what he wanted now that there was nowhere left to run, and he said quietly that he just wanted to be someone. Again, not a legend, not a memory, just real, just here, and she nodded, because that was all she wanted to. The silence on the forgotten moon didn't last long, because even though they had escaped the mercenaries for now, both Callan and Seraya knew the peace was only temporary, and somewhere beyond the stars, someone powerful had decided that their reunion was a threat, maybe, to the fragile peace between humans and Tharian, or maybe to secrets hidden deeper than either of them could guess. As they sat beneath the strange violet sky, Callan checked the shuttle systems and discovered a weak pulse signal had been sent from their ship just before the jump, likely a trace beacon hidden in the engine core, meaning their enemies would find them again soon, maybe in hours, maybe less, and they had no choice but to run again. But this time, Seraya said she didn't want to run without a purpose, and Callan agreed, because this wasn't just about safety anymore. It was about truth, about ending something that had started 5 years ago and never really ended. They left the moon quickly, jumping into uncharted space using Callan's old network of forgotten routes, paths carved through collapsed wormholes, disused fuel rings, and silent relay stations left behind by long-dead explorers, places where no official patrols dared to go, and where the stars whispered secrets in cold blue light. As they moved deeper into this hidden web of paths, Seraya began to see the galaxy not as a queen, but as Callan did, as a patchwork of broken places, people without names, and corners where law and hope rarely reached. And yet, even here, he knew how to survive, how to read the flicker of a dead beacon, and tell if the path ahead was safe or a trap, and she followed his lead, learning fast, adjusting systems, repairing relays, and in between danger, they shared quiet moments over warm drinks and old stories, their connection growing stronger, not just from memory, but from what they were now. Still, the chase never truly ended, and once, as they stopped near a shattered mining ring to refuel, a drone found them small, silent, deadly, marked with Therian symbols twisted into war banners, and before it could call for backup, Callan disabled it with a precise EMP blast. But the damage was done, and they knew the hunters were close again. Desperate for a way to disappear, Callan suggested something. Dangerous, an old orbital camouflage array buried inside a derelict research moon, known as Station Varn, a place rumored to be haunted, cursed, or worse, abandoned after a failed AI experiment nearly wiped out its creators. Seralia agreed without fear, trusting him now more than anything, and together they flew toward the ghost station, docking at the edge of a massive crater that swallowed most of the structure, where half the station hung frozen in time, its systems flickering like they had been waiting all these years. Inside it was cold and hollow, filled with frozen data cores and long-dead machines. But they worked together to find the camouflage controls, tracing power lines through dark corridors while strange noises echoed from vents and walls, sounds like whispers in metal. But they kept moving, Callan guiding her through every danger as if he'd done it all before. And finally, deep in the station's heart, they found the old camouflage module, still functional but dormant its energy. Source long gone. Seralia made a choice then, pulling the symbiote crystal from her chest, the living power that connected her to the Therian neural net, something sacred, something no queen had ever willingly removed, but she handed it to Callan without regret, saying, "This will hide us." And when he asked what would happen to her, she only smiled and said, "I'll survive if you're with me." And with that, he plugged the crystal into the array, and the entire station lit up for the first time in decades, cloaking itself, and their ship in a field of static silence that no scanner could break. But the act nearly killed her, draining her body, severing her link to the Therian mind stream, and she collapsed in his arms, weak and barely breathing. And Callan didn't run this time, he stayed, carrying her back to the ship, setting up medical systems and waiting at her side through a long, painful night where every breath she took felt like a battle against time. He didn't sleep, didn't speak, just held her hand and listened to the quiet hum of the ship as the stars outside passed unnoticed. And when she finally opened her eyes, pale but alive, he smiled with a relief that said more than words. In that moment, something changed between them, not a reunion, but a decision, that they were not just connected by the past, but by the future they now shared, one built on trust, sacrifice, and something deeper than duty. The next day, while Seralia rested, Callan found a private channel through the old station's comms and sent a message, not to any government, but to a contact he once trusted, a smuggler turned peace broker, someone who could carry the truth of what they'd learned and what they were fighting for. And though it risked exposure, he knew it was time to stop hiding. Seralia, now without her symbiote, would be declared dead by her people if she didn't return soon, but maybe that was the answer, a clean break from the systems that had trapped them both. And as they stared out at the stars cloaking them, in silence, Callan said softly, "If we vanish now, they'll never find us, And Seralia replied, "Good, let them look for legends while we live our truth." And with that they set a new course through the forgotten stars, not as fugitives, but as two souls finally free. News of Queen Seralia's death spread quickly across Therian space, announced by a formal broadcast from the Royal Council, claiming she had perished during a sudden border attack while on a secret peace mission. And while many grieved, others moved swiftly to claim power. But what no one knew was that the Queen was very much alive, hidden with Callan on a quiet moon far beyond the charted systems, living in the shadows of ruins where they had once found peace, now using the silence to rebuild not a throne, but a purpose. Seralia, though weakened from the loss of her symbiont, had not lost her will, and each day she grew stronger, walking through the old colony halls with Callan, talking with him not about kingdoms or war, but about life, hope, and the strange, small things that made them human in their own way. Their ship, now repaired and hidden within the camouflage array of Station Varn, became their mobile base, from which they began to travel in secret, never staying in one place long, never using names but quietly helping where help was needed, resolving small disputes between frontier stations, delivering medicine to sick colonies, disabling pirate beacons, and spreading messages of unity without banners, speeches, or titles, just actions. Over time, people began to talk about them, not as rulers or warriors, but as legends, two mysterious travelers, one human and one with silver eyes, who appeared without warning, solved impossible problems, then vanished like ghosts. And while the stories grew wild, the results were real, slowly changing minds and calming tempers along the edges of human Therian space. Still, danger never slept, and more than once old enemies came too close, like when a bounty hunter spotted Callan on a fuel moon and nearly exposed them, or when a Therian warlord broadcast a challenge across deep space, offering a reward to anyone who could find the Queen's lost crystal, which was now hidden deep inside the heart of the old camouflage system, still pulsing with quiet power. Through it all, Callan and Seralia stood together, no longer lost or hiding, but living by a new promise that they would never again let fear or politics steal what was human in them. Then, one day, a message arrived through a secure line from the same peace broker Callan had contacted months earlier, a message that changed everything. It said that unrest had begun to stir in both Therian and human high councils, fueled by lies, suspicion, and the sudden void left by the Queen's death, and that if someone didn't stop the rising conflict, another war might begin, worse than the last. Seralia stood in silence after hearing the words, knowing what she had to do, and though Callan feared losing her again, he did not stop her. Instead, they built a new plan, one that would not just save peace, but change the way both sides saw it. Days later, a powerful signal burst across known space, not from any government, but from a pirate relay station long thought destroyed, and on every major screen appeared a recorded message of Seralia and Callan standing side by side, not dressed as queen and pilot, but as two people who had once risked everything for each other and now spoke for all who had been forgotten, betrayed, or used by war. In the message, Seralia told the truth of her survival, of the lies that kept them apart, and of the dangers that came from ruling by fear. She did not call for rebellion, but for reason, for balance, for something new where humans and Therian could lead together without chains of the past. The message shocked the galaxy, sparked debates, and broke old alliances, but it also inspired thousands, from soldiers who refused to fight to diplomats who pushed for talks, and slowly the tide began to turn. The Therian Council, under pressure, installed a new regent, someone Seralia trusted, and allowed a new path forward, one guided by those who believed in peace more than power. Callan and Seralia didn't return to rule. They stayed in the Evatipenen shadows, continuing their quiet work, watching as the stars they once ran from began to change. In time, statues were built in their honor, not of their faces, but of a human hand and a Therian one, joined in light, placed in the center of the first shared spaceport built between their worlds. No one ever saw them at the ceremony, but a cargo pilot swore he spotted two figures standing far in the distance, watching from the rim of a canyon, holding hands as the sun rose across twin horizons. And though history books debated their true fate, some saying they died in hiding, others claiming they still walked among the stars, one truth remained clear, that the promise they made to each other and to the galaxy had changed everything, not with war or crowns, but with something far rarer and stronger, the courage to be human in a galaxy that had forgotten what that truly meant.